In this session, we will delve into the TIB AAC's program for revolutionary transformation of Nigeria, which is titled A People's Manifesto for Total Liberation. Let me start by giving a brief overview of the history of the People's Manifesto for Total Liberation. The document was completed in the last quarter of 2022 in the lead up to the 2023 Nigerian presidential elections. It was the work of the Manifesto Review Committee of the AAC, which was set up by the party. The mandate of that committee was to come up with a revamped program that reflected the ideological leanings of the party. The work took several months and was subsequently shared far and wide with various organizations, interest groups, and individuals for their inputs. Let me also just say, this manifesto is a big document, and it is not possible to cover everything inside of it in one go, nor would it be useful for us to do so, because that's beyond the scope of today's session. What you should know is that it contains detailed analysis of the conditions that existed around the time of the 2023 elections, and it proposes policies to address the problems. The policies in this manifesto are important to the extent that they speak to AAC's response to the existing situation in 2023, but policies are also supposed to adapt to the shifting conditions. What remains fixed are the principles and ideological undercurrents that inform the policies. That is why today we will study the manifesto with a goal to draw out these principles rather than focus on the individual policies. In fact, there has been so much changes in the conditions under which this manifesto was written, in most cases for the worse, that a number of those policies may have to shift. One example was the proposition that suggested a minimum wage of no less than 100,000 naira. And while as a matter of principle, the manifesto suggests a sliding scale adjustment of minimum wage to the cost of living, I suspect that if it were to be written today, the proposed minimum wage will be multiples of the proposed 100,000 naira in 2022. Okay, so now let us examine the question, why is it important for TIB to have a manifesto and for its members to study it? You see, many people mistake a revolution only as a mass event that takes place to remove an oppressive system. This is just part of the story. A revolution goes deeper than this. It is also a process of putting in place a positive vision for how a liberated society should exist. The truth is that it is easier to destroy what we don't like than to agree and work towards what we like. However, revolution takes more than just destroying a system. Something must be built in its place because, as it is often said, nature abhors vacuum. If those of us who have a positive vision that entails total liberation of our people do not seize power after deposing an oppressive system, another group of oppressors will seize power. This happened in the lead up to the transition into democracy in 1999, where the new leaders were civilian oppressors of Nigerians. And it is that dispensation that continues to this day. Now, let us take a moment to imagine a scenario where we have seized power after removing the current ruling class. And it is time to implement our positive vision. But we don't have a collective vision that we all agreed upon as our program for change. What do you think will happen? I need not delve into that. But it is just to say that this is what makes having a manifesto important. And it is important for us to study it so that we can all internalize the positive vision that we have and be able to practice unity in action when it is time to operationalize the change that we want to see. Now, let us look a little bit more into an overview of the AAC-TIB ideology and principles. The text that appears on your screen is an excerpt from the foreword that our convener, Omoyele Sowore, wrote to set the tone for what ideology and principles should guide our vision for a liberated Nigeria. He said, African Action Congress is an anti-imperialist, pan-African, eco-socialist party which is unequivocally committed to the struggle for the total liberation of the Nigerian people. We will achieve this through a systemic transformation of the country based on a sustainable development and the building of a just and open democratic space that enables all Nigerians to take part in the development of our great and beloved country. So the question is, what are the meanings and/or importance of the highlighted terms? Let us look at them one after the other. All right, so we are an anti-imperialist party. What this means is that we are anti-imperialist because we stand against the economic exploitation of the global south, including Nigeria, by the major capitalist countries of the world, especially, for example, the United States, European countries, and their settler colonial outposts. Take It Back and AAC are ideologically anti-capitalist. This means that we understand that capitalism is an ideology that allows only a few rich people to own our resources, while the rest of us work to enrich them. We believe that this system is inherently exploitative and must be changed. We are Pan-Africanist because we believe that our best chance of exerting our power and independence as Nigerians is by forging a political and economic union with the rest of Africa and other Black majority countries around the world. We are eco-socialists because we believe that the Nigerian masses should exercise democratic control over our environment, our wealth, our resources, and the fruits of our labor, not a few billionaires, whether they are Nigerians or shareholders with Shell. We also believe that the preservation and development of our ecosystem, our environment, should be a key goal of the Nigerian people, given the dangerous effects of human-induced climate change. We have all seen the rampant and increasing occurrences of floods, of droughts, of erosion and deforestation that is taking place in the country. This has far-reaching implications for the well-being of Nigerian people. This is what informs the eco-socialist position of AAC-TIB. Okay, so now that we have had an overview of the principles that underlie the manifesto. Let us look at the pillars of the manifesto more closely, because you will see that it speaks to most of the challenges that we have in Nigeria. Now, the pillars themselves include security is peace and justice for all, a green economy that works for the people, social policy for a just society, and building a better Nigeria, winning a new world. Before we look at these pillars individually, let me first set the stage for how to interpret them. We should not see them as separate items that deal with unrelated things. Instead, we should see them as a narrative of interconnected principles. That is why I like the metaphor of pillars. It speaks to how seemingly separate columns work together to hold a structure together, so that the weight of that structure is evenly distributed. So let us see how this applies to the pillars. First of all, we note that insecurity is a problem in Nigeria. But why does insecurity exist? It exists because a small number of individuals own and control the economy. This leaves most of us in poverty. At the last count, over 60% of Nigerians. Now, you can see how the first pillar and the second pillar are dialectically related. An economy that does not work for all the people, but only works for a handful of people, will result in insecurity. Yet we also see that to be able to make the economy work, people have to feel safe and secure enough to take part in productive activities. Take, for example, the way that the incessant kidnappings and herdsmen versus farmers clashes have affected food production in the country, and how that has further led to the increase of food prices in the markets. So this manifesto proposes to address the security problem, which then gives us space to redesign the economy to work for the people, not just for Dangote or Otedola or Elumelu. Furthermore, if you look at what the pillar, social policy for a just society, tries to address, it speaks to things like access to healthcare, education, housing, dignity of labor, women's liberation, and eco-social justice. Aside women's liberation, these are roughly things that we might say address our means of sustenance, that is, the need to survive as humans. Now, means of sustenance include things like our income, our housing, clothing, healthcare, education, and so on. But how do we create our means of sustenance? We create our means of sustenance by having access to the means of production. The means of production are the things we need to produce the means of sustenance. They can include land, raw materials, factories, and so on. Now, how can we have access to means of sustenance when only a few people control the means of production? So as you can see, for us to have a just social policy, we need an economy that belongs to and works for all of us. This way, we will all be able to have access to the means of sustenance. Finally, if we look at the fourth pillar, or building a better Nigeria, winning a new world, you'll see that there are two main things it entails. The first is to build democracy from below that embraces all Nigerians. And the second is for Nigeria to adopt a policy of anti-imperialist internationalism for global justice. You will see that you cannot have a democratic society where the social policies of that society is not just. There will always be people who are excluded. Additionally, it is only through a just system that our people can gain the confidence to project a desire for global justice towards all other oppressed people. Also, when we have just social policies, We position ourselves as exemplary representatives of the justice that other people yearn for in the world. This way, when we make our positions known on the global stage, we are not easily dismissible. So, a better Nigeria and a new anti-imperialist world is related to having a just society. All right. So now that we have gone through how the policies are interrelated, interconnected, let us look at some key principles of the individual policies. Starting with the first one, security is peace and justice for all. In the manifesto, it lays out what the situation is with regards to security. The key point to draw out is this. The politicians and oligarchs have largely used the state of perennial conflict as a pretext to both plunder our nation's resources and to divide our people along sectional lines in order to advance their narrow political interests. So that is why we see inter-ethnic conflicts and inter-religious conflicts and all other types of conflicts that emerge. Some of the proposed solutions by AAC include setting up and providing grants to elected community level mediation committees. Here, emphasizing the importance of community in resolving its problems, because who better to know the source of its problems than communities themselves? Furthermore, the AAC manifesto proposes investment in economic recovery and integration, again speaking to the economic roots of insecurity in the country. The AAC manifesto also proposes the inauguration and support of local truth and reconciliation commissions. It proposes ending the death penalty and cruel and unusual punishments and torture in Nigeria. It also proposes as a long-term goal restorative justice and abolition, which means we will work towards making prisons and carceral systems obsolete. So now let us look at some key principles of the second pillar, which is a green economy that works for the people. Now again, the manifesto lays bare what the situation is. Nigeria has remained unindustrialized and economic growth has not translated into development. Only a handful of people benefited from the economic growth that we've witnessed, with increasing concentration and centralization of wealth in a few hands. The overwhelming majority of Nigerians have nothing to show for the economic growth, so that by the year 2022, it was just 3 people whose wealth was equal to that of the bottom 108 million Nigerians. That is incredible. And this was in 2022. By now, the situation is even far worse. Some of the ways that AAC has proposed to address this are the following. One, the transition away from fossil fuels and expansion of renewable energy. This would immediately reduce the conflicts around the control of resources and also democratize access to renewable energy, which would allow different communities to become more productive through access to these energy sources. Another proposed solution is popular and participatory energy governance. This means, again, that it would be the communities that would have control over the energy governance in the country. Another proposal is to nationalize oil, gas, and mining sectors. This should come as no surprise because these are the most productive sectors in terms of income for the country. Nationalizing them means making these means of productions collectively owned, which would then mean that the dividends from ownership would go to all Nigerians, not just a few billionaires who own oil wells. We will tax the rich and ensure that there is fair distribution of wealth to go around to those who are not as well-to-do. Niger Delta community will co-own the oil and gas industry. Trade unions will take part in decision making. We will prioritize industry and manufacturing to lead to rapid development. Food sovereignty would be one of the priorities, and public transportation will also be focused on to enable all Nigerians to have access to these amenities. We'll also prioritize the setting up of cooperatives and credit unions. Now, moving on to the third pillar, which is social policy for a just society. The situation is as follows. The poor people in Nigeria do not enjoy basic social, economic, and cultural rights, such as the right to education, the right to health, the right to housing, the right to water and access to basic facilities, and the right to a dignified living. We can never have a society that is based on justice without ensuring the universal enjoyment of these democratic rights. That is why AAC's manifesto proposes accessible, affordable, and holistic healthcare for all Nigerians. This is to include primary healthcare centers, focus on mental health, focus on wellness, recreation and play, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and end gender-based violence. Also looking to cater to the needs of persons living with disabilities and special needs. We'll also be re-engineering the education sector for the 21st century, including strengthening academic and non-academic staff unions, including parental and community involvement in the education of Nigerians, and making local languages a mandatory requirement in our curriculum. This also includes, as part of our proposition for this pillar, women's liberation. This entails political participation of women, support for smallhold women farmers, and end to discriminatory laws and policies against women. This pillar will also look to expand the role of youth in governance and civil society. This pillar also looks to implementing dignity of labor and social protection for workers, including setting the minimum wage as a living wage, including establishing the right for workers to organize and collectively bargain, including setting up a comprehensive social protection system, salaries and pension, decent working time, and worker-owned enterprise. We'll also look to create affordable social housing for Nigerians in that section of the pillar. Now, looking at the final pillar of the Manifesto for Total Liberation, which is building a better Nigeria, democracy from below, and embracing all Nigerians. The situation here is that the elite few see everything in Nigeria, including the people, as simply means for them to become wealthier. This extractive relationship thus often results in the neglect or outright violation of the poor masses' rights by powerful private and state actors. We find this neglect expressed in the most dramatic of ways, whether it be the fact that 2 in 5 Nigerians live in extreme poverty or the dilapidated infrastructure across the country, or the gross violation of human rights by the country's armed forces, or the violent electoral processes in the country. Some proposed solutions by AAC includes democracy from below, embracing all Nigerians. And what this entails are legal reforms to end discriminatory practices, affirming unity in ethnic diversity and linguistic plurality, protecting and promoting cultural heritage, national reconciliation and restructuring, affirm the rights of nationalities to self-determination within Nigeria, and finally, begin the process for a people's constitution for a new Nigeria that will involve wide consultations and a referendum to end. As for the second part of this pillar, which is an anti-imperialist internationalism for global justice, the AAC will push for a People's African Union that takes into consideration working people, poor people as part of its constituents when developing continent-wide policy. This would also entail political unification of African countries and economic unification. We'll also be pushing for voting rights for passport-holding Nigerians in the diaspora. We'll also look at Caribbean nations being a part of the African Union. We'll also have policies for the right of return program for the descendants of kidnapped and enslaved Africans. We will push a policy of reciprocity and mutual respect. And we will push a policy also of solidarity with oppressed peoples around the world. This brings us to the end